Yes, it's been a year of this now. People are getting tired. But vaccines are rolling out, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, or whatever the politicians say, and there's a sense that the worst of it is finally behind us. But that's not to say it's not without its lasting consequences, especially when it comes to how we process media and information. Because for the last year, we've all been living in this sort of modified reality, where people actually have to keep up with the news cycle to get an idea of what their day-to-day lives are going to look like. And yes, the roller coaster of lockdowns and public health measures sucks, but we have it on good authority that this is a temporary arrangement and that it's necessary to prevent a complete catastrophic collapse of the national healthcare system. That's a laudable goal. In theory, we should all be on board with that, but we're not. Why is it that after a year we still see anti-mask protests? There are hundreds of thousands of people across the world that still think this thing is made up. It's part of a sinister conspiracy to tear down the world order and remake human civilization from its very core. How the hell did this happen? How did we get to this point where people living on the same street or even in the same house can be so completely opposed when it comes to the questions of COVID? How did we get here? I'm glad you asked. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, why is it that so many people don't think that COVID exists? In a word, or two words, it comes down to media theory. I know that sounds boring, but it's not. Check this out. Way back in the early 1900s, there was this guy called Harold Lasswell who got all his clout in the media theory game from this nifty model he came up with called Lasswell's model of communication. Unimaginative name aside, this was pretty cutting-edge stuff for its time. Lasswell was one of the first people to sit down and think, hey, what if all this mass media like newspapers and radio might be changing the way people think about the world? This is what they called the hypodermic needle approach, or direct effects theory, arguing that mass media has a direct effect on the unsuspecting public. It was a solid start, but over the years it was critiqued and reworked by scholars who came after Lasswell, who thought it was a little too basic and made too many assumptions about the direct effect of stuff like propaganda on how people think. One of these critics was this handsome fellow by the name of Paul Lazarsfeld. Paul here took the idea that media has effects on people and really ran with it. You see, what Lasswell did not take into account was how sometimes people talk amongst themselves and influence each other on an interpersonal level. So Lazarsfeld took Lasswell's model and improved upon it by dropping his own theory, which he called the two-step flow. In the two-step flow, Lazarsfeld introduces the idea of what he calls opinion leaders. This is a layer of people between the mass media and the mass public who can influence their friends into thinking certain things about what they see in the media. These are usually people who are more media literate and consume a lot more media than the average person typically would. You might have these people in your lives already. Think about it. For my generation, it's probably that one friend who somehow has time to listen to 5 different podcasts a day and will never shut up about how the latest podcast they listen to is going to change your life. Whatever the case might be, these opinion leaders Lazarsfeld identified all the way back in the 1950s still play a key role in how mass media and information affects people's beliefs about the world today. To put it in other words, Lazarsfeld basically thought up the idea of influencers about 65 years before Instagram was even invented. So again, how does this relate to anti-maskers and COVID-19? Well, let's unpack the two-step flow model by thinking about COVID-19 media reporting. If Lasswell's hypodermic needle approach was completely accurate, there would be almost complete consensus on COVID-19 globally. You'd have everyone in line with the WHO's messaging and we'd all stay home and be happy. But no. We can't have nice things because some opinion leaders with alternative interpretations of the truth, for whatever reason, are twisting objective facts and implanting crazy ideas in the heads of ordinary, unsuspecting people. Let's look at an example. President Trump, January 22nd, telling CNBC that everything will be fine with regards to COVID-19. This illustrates the two-step flow model perfectly because if Lasswell was correct in saying that there was a direct effect from President Trump's message on all Americans, nobody would have worried about the pandemic at all, and there would have been no public health response of any kind anywhere in the States, which we know is not the way it went down. Now let's apply Lazarsfeld's two-step flow, and we'll get a much more accurate picture of what happens. First off, Trump's message that everything is fine went from Trump through the mass media to Trump supporting opinion leaders, who then influenced other people in their social circles to ignore the objective evidence and believe that there really was nothing to worry about, which a lot of people did. Drilling down a little deeper now, you could even think of Trump himself as an opinion leader for many people. This was, in a way, key to some of Trump's political success, as he presented himself as being in the know and on the inside of all this supposed corruption and elitism in Washington that sought to keep Americans in the dark about things exactly like COVID. For the more fanatic Trump supporters, anything that came out of that guy's mouth was gospel, right? He was their opinion leader in chief, you could say. Closer to home, let's look at a Canadian example in this knucklehead by the name of Chris Sky, who's convinced thousands of his followers that A, they don't need to follow public health rules, and B, if you do follow public health rules, that means you're weak and stupid and submissive to the government's taking away your rights, or whatever. So what's the lesson here? What can we learn from Lazarsfeld's theory? Well, we can use this theory to better understand the world around us. Be conscious of opinion leaders in your life. Try to identify who they are and how they influence you. Choose your opinion leaders wisely. If you find yourself believing in something that most people reject as complete fiction, consider how you arrived at that conclusion. Who influenced you along the way? Expanding and diversifying your portfolio of opinion leaders is a sure way to better understand the messaging you receive through mass media.